Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to the residents and community members of Stonyford. And look, it is a warm afternoon too here, on where are we, the 19th of February. It's close to 30 degrees outside, and it's actually very windy. My name is Raj Samurai, and I have the privilege of taking you through this facilitated session on fire safety essentials. This presentation will last approximately 1 to 1.5 hours, and it relies on interaction from yourselves. We're going to take you through a journey to talk about fire safety essentials. Before we get into the real underneath the skin of fire and fire behaviour, let's do our traditional acknowledgement of country. And by this, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are hosting this meeting today, and certainly pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and of course, any other Aboriginal people that may be joining us today. I'd like to move straight into the technology that's involved with today's presentation, and that is your ability to interact with me as your host. I can't see you for one, you can see me, and the way that you can interact with me is through the chat function and also through polling. So firstly, the chat function. The chat function will allow you to make a comment by actually placing your mouse over the chat icon and then writing or typing into your keyboard the appropriate question or remark or comment that you would like to make. Your remarks and comments are totally anonymous. I don't know who's making these comments. They are, of course, optional, but with an engagement activity like this, we'd like to think that everyone has a right to share their comment. When we talk about polls, which is the other way of interacting with me, a poll will be launched every now and again, and you have the ability to answer in a single response or multiple choice response to a series of questions that will be asked from a number of polls. I think there's about 5 to 6 polls, and these polls allow us to get a better feel of what your understanding of fire and fire behaviour is. Now, this presentation is being recorded. You're not being recorded in this. I will be recorded purely for my own personal, I suppose, reflection and personal improvement when it comes to doing presentations of this type. Fantastic. So let's just have a test of that chat function before we do anything else. By way of the chat function, so as I said, scan your mouse icon over the chat icon and tell me, where are you joining us from today? What's your locality? Is it actually Stonyford, or is it sort of a neighbouring area or somewhere else completely different? I'd love to know. So make those comments in the chat function and we can test that straight away. Oh, that's fantastic. So I'm seeing that there's a fair few people that are joining us from Stonyford itself, local brigade members as well. That's fantastic. It's great to know that. So what's today all about? Why are we gathered online to do this presentation? I'm not going to give you death by PowerPoint, and this is all about understanding fire and fire behaviour and exactly what it is that we would like to emphasise during this time. This program is entitled Fire Safety Essentials, and by its very name, it is the essentials that we are going to be talking about today. The real grassroots basics that form the very foundation of staying safe during this time. Of course, there will be a lot of discussion around understanding your local risks, and in actual fact, these presentations are personalised to the area, in this case, of Stonyford, the area of the discussion. What to expect from a fire? Well, what is it that really is the nuts and bolts of fire? Communication, and how do we know if there's a fire in our area? Where do we go? What's the go-to places? And of course, planning and decision making. These are pivotal to fire safety, your safety during a bad fire day. And of course, we all know sometimes that the best laid plans can fail. So what are our options should these plans fail? What I'm going to do is kick off straight away by understanding the first element of those learning outcomes, which is understanding local fire risks. And when we talk about understanding local fire risks, this program is tailored towards the people in the communities around the Stonyford area. Stonyford, a few words about Stonyford before we carry on. Stonyford is actually located in the municipality of Corangamite. And Stonyford itself is a rural locality in Western Victoria, used mainly for grazing and dairying. Stonyford's name is actually descriptive of the area. The stone is from volcanic material, and the ford refers to a crossing place on a small stream, Stonyford. A feature of Stonyford's landscape is the stone walls, built to clear and fence paddocks. The area is prone to rabbit infestation and grass fires, and that's a really pertinent point for this particular locality, the actual vulnerability to grass fires. A car wrecker's yard has been a well-known but unattractive landmark, and there's a hall and a local CFA shed on the Cobden Stonyford Road. The town's population stands at 51. Let's peel back the layers a bit more now as we start talking more about exactly what this slide is showing us and what it's telling us. The slide offers a range of landscapes that actually are present throughout Victoria. We have extensive areas of grassland, bushland, and of course, mountainous forest areas and heaps of farmlands. That is the varied landscape of Victoria. Victoria, as the slide clearly shows, is actually one of the most fire-prone areas in the world, bushfire-prone areas in the world. But the one thing that we must take away from this is that because of the varying landscape, the different parts of Victoria offer a different amount of risk when it comes to fire. Let's just expand on that a bit more, because fire has been in the Australian psyche across the Australian continent for millions of years, and it's been significant in shaping the landscape as we see it today. Many fires were started by lightning. Aboriginal people used fire for many thousands of years to care for country. In this regard, the fires were a tool that encouraged the growth and extent of grasslands to enhance hunting, for one. It reduced levels of fuel. We'll talk about reducing fuel load. And it kept vegetation from becoming too dense and hard to walk through. So it was cleared, so it would be an easier passage. Another interesting point here is that there were very few records of bushfires in the early stages of European settlement, and only the real records only really started in 1851. This is the area under discussion today. This is the southwest of the state of Victoria. We are located in the bottom left-hand corner, as you can clearly see. This map actually shows the different weather districts across the state, and each one is denoted by a different color. So these are different weather districts. Each of these weather or fire districts will have its own level of fire risk, as we mentioned earlier. Another thing that we must take into consideration here is what we call the seasonal outlook. Well, what do we mean by the seasonal outlook? This describes the overall weather trend of what's happening in your weather district, the overall weather trend. Now, this particular fire season, there is the possibility of what we call the La Nina effect or La Nina conditions. The La Nina conditions are expected to reduce the risk of prolonged fire activity across most of Victoria compared to this time last year. Let's just go into that in a bit more detail. What does La Nina actually mean? La Nina itself, it essentially, in a nutshell, means increased rainfall, more rain, okay? But it also means cooler daytime temperatures, usually south of the tropics, with warmer overnight temperatures in the north. The last La Nina weather event happened during the winter of 2017-2018, and El Nino, its counterpart, followed in the years 2018-2019. So there is a cyclical balance between these weather patterns that then will determine our weather district forecast. What does this mean to Stonyford, I hear you ask? Why Stonyford? Why have we included Stonyford? Stonyford itself is in a part of Victoria that has experienced slightly above average rainfall and has therefore above average soil moisture. We've already spoken about that vulnerability to fast moving grass fires. We know about that. Now, this is compounded by the fact that there is now enough moisture to make the grass grow well and even more prolifically and more extensively. Remember also that with this rapid and extensive growth of fuel, with the high temperatures as is experienced today, with a 30-degree plus day, this fuel load will dry or cure very quickly, very, very rapidly, and therefore be available in the event of ignition or fire. One must also note that nearby bush will also dry out very quickly. And of course, as a consequence, there is the increased potential for fast-moving grass fires. Like every season, there is a need to be prepared for a fire that could happen as a result of this high fuel load. Now, I, for one, am extremely passionate about fire behaviour and fire safety. Risk and risk mitigation is kind of exactly where I'm coming from here. If we know that we are entering a phase of high or potential fire activity in our locality, and we know about the dangers that imposes, we need to be away from that harm and the potential harm that could cause. And this will be the common thread of this presentation, that it's all about leaving and leaving early, being away from the danger, away from potential harm as best as you can. Let's now discuss the local vegetation. And when we talk about local vegetation, let's just open the chat function up again and get some idea from our listeners this afternoon about what do you think makes up your landscape? What is your landscape made up of? So if you could use the chat function, that'll be fantastic. Oh, lovely. I'm getting some really great responses here. So and then they'll all say, yes, grassland, bush. Yep, beautiful. Okay, lovely. Thanks for your responses. And now I will just give you a summary of some of the notes that were scripted in this response, which is, look, and as your results also shows, that the predominant fuel around Stonyford is usually grass with areas of bush and bush along roadsides, okay? So this is an area of risk from fast-moving grass fires with likely ember attack. We'll talk more about what embers are and the importance of understanding embers shortly. And the possibility or likely event of ember attack from nearby bush to the north, northwest, and also the east. What does this all mean? This means that open grassland, as is typical of Stonyford, is susceptible to the wind, and therefore fast-moving grass fires. Remember that wind is the driving force behind fire direction. A change of wind will change the fire direction of the fire. We talk about the fire front, the very front edge of the fire. Wind has the capacity to change the direction of that fire front. Interestingly, it's also important to note topography and the lay of the land. inclines and the depressions, the climbs and the rises, the hills, etc. Stonyford is slightly hilly in certain parts, overall relatively flat, but we need to be aware that in the event of a fast-moving grass fire, the grass fire will actually accelerate uphill more so than coming downhill. It'd still be fast coming downhill, but as a rule of thumb, fires travel faster uphill than they do going downhill. In actual fact, for every 10-degree rise in the inclination of a hill, a fire will double in speed. Yes, double in speed. I'd like to launch a poll at this stage and talk a bit more now about my next slide, which looks at local risks particular to your area. So here's our poll. This poll is entitled Understanding Local Risks. It consists of a multiple choice question. I'm just about to launch the poll now. And what I'd like you to do is consider your responses to that poll. And we've spoken about some of these factors already. What are some of the things that could make your local area in Stonyford a high-risk area? Could it be the windy roads? And I know there's a fair few of those in the area. Could it be those large limbs that are hanging over roads that could probably limit access or what we call egress or exit routes? Is Stonyford a place of high tourist? Is it a high tourist destination, or is it a passage or thoroughfare for vehicles to perhaps nearby Warrnambool or Cobden, or even perhaps to the Great Ocean Road or towards Colac or Cobden? We've spoken about the speed of grass fires and the importance of understanding that for every 10 degrees rise in inclination, the fire will double in speed. We've spoken also about the need to be mindful of embers and ember attack, and I'll be showing you an animation very shortly that gives you a depiction, a very real life depiction of what embers are and how damaging they can be. And of course, we've spoken about high fuel load, and particularly in Stonyford, where you've got huge areas of open grassland. I'm going to end the polling there and we'll share some of those results. Well, there you go. Right across the board, perhaps not so much in the high tourist area in summer, but every other element of what we call local risk has been ticked by the audience today. So that gives us some indication that in the event of a fire, we know what the local risks are. So I'm going to stop sharing those results for now and close that poll. And say, feel free to offer any chat that you wish as we proceed through this presentation. It's great having you all on board. So that's local risks. Let's talk a bit more now as we progress through the presentation on the resources at hand. Stonyford, I've been reliably informed by your brigade captain, has 22 members. At its disposal, it has one tanker, one quick fill, and one trailer. This resource has to look after 60 properties and dwellings across a population of 51 people. In the case of Stonyford, perhaps the maths aren't as difficult as some of the other areas that we talk about. There seems to be perhaps a slightly achievable way of having that assistance on your drive or at your farm, perhaps. But remember also that the Stonyford Brigade may be called to other neighbouring fires in neighbouring localities, so therefore they are not available at your disposal. The point that we're making here, it's very much a rhetorical question around, well, how realistic would it be to expect a tanker with a local CFA crew attending a fire at your home, at your farm, on a bad fire day? How realistic is that? We've got to understand that the brigades work extremely hard, 24/7, in a volunteer capacity to keep us safe. The one point that I'd like to make from this slide is that we've got to take ownership of the situation. We've got to take ownership of personal safety. Don't have the expectation that a tanker will be there to save you, to protect you, to put out that fire. And this is why we strongly advocate leave and leave early. Have a fire plan. I should mention that there's no need to take notes during the course of this presentation. Resources will be available and links to resources will be available at the end of this presentation. We're probably about halfway through the presentation at this stage, and we've had some interesting chats and dialogue and some good polling results. But the basic aim of this first half of this presentation is to give you a basic understanding of fire behaviour. That's one of our key messages. It's about making you aware of the various risks that exist out there and reinforcing the need to have a plan. Don't rely on the fire truck. Take responsibility yourself. We're going to move on now, and look, I make no apologies for the animations that I'm about to show you that depict the very graphic nature of ember attack and also radiant heat. The content and the messaging by these two animations is absolutely crystal clear and requires no further explanation. What is it that we want to what is it that we expect from fire? And the first animation that I'm just about to share with you is based on an ember attack animation. I'll let the animation speak for itself.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs, and pieces of bark. They help the bushfire spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short-distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers, which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes, and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions, meaning it will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum, increasing the intensity of the fire. The updraft in the column lifts embers, like large pieces of burning ribbon bark, hundreds of metres into the air, where strong winds can carry them many kilometres beyond the fire front. On Black Saturday, embers travelled more than 30 kilometres ahead of the main fire. When these embers land, they often start fires where leaves naturally accumulate, like in gutters, doorways, and garden beds. So, while you might think you're safe when a bushfire is far away, embers can fall from the sky and land around your home long before you even know there's a fire. But remember, your home isn't the only thing under threat during an ember attack. By the time you realise the danger, it might be too late as escape routes become jammed. Embers can also start fires on roads and block them completely, making late evacuation dangerous or impossible. That's why leaving early, before a fire starts, is always your safest option.
High impact, I know. It is very graphic and it's very real and it's designed to be like that. In parts of Victoria, like Stonyford, where particularly in those grassland areas, as is typical of Stonyford, there are a number of threats to your home and property. Yes, ember attacks certainly is one of the really big ones. However, we've also got to talk about direct flame damage. What do I mean by direct flame damage? Dry fuel on your property that allows a running grass fire to burn right up to your house. So it's the idea that if you've got fuel to your doorstep, you have fire to your doorstep. And how do we mitigate that? How do we reduce the risk of fire getting anywhere near our properties? The Property Advice Visit Service, the PAVS program, is active and running, which allows our community members to understand preparing our homes in the event of fire. And that's again available as a resource at the end of our presentation this afternoon. But it's about causing the break between the continuity of fuel, so having a bit of a driveway, a bare bit of land where there is no combustible fuel, a veg patch perhaps, gravel or stone, anything that will break that continuity of fuel will reduce the risk of fire to your home, fire to your doorstep. We often say that vegetation looks to burn, and our Aboriginal people would often use this as a means of releasing and the germination of seeds for fresh regrowth within particular areas. And it was a common practice. I might now just move on and by just saying to you that by far ember attack is the biggest cause of property loss during that fire. And this particular image here just shows you some of the ways that grass fires progress. And often is the case that, if the fuel load is high, then certainly the grass fire is going to be more prolific. There's no two ways about that. And driven by the components of wind, the fire will move very rapidly. Let's spend a couple of minutes now. And what I'm going to do now is show you another video. And again, if you feel that this is too sensitive or too disturbing for you, please look away and then join us at the end of the animation. It's designed to have this shock factor because sometimes messaging has to get straight to that emotional level within yourselves to understand that fire is a very clear and present danger. It's a force of Mother Nature that is uncontrollable and is unpredictable. Yes, we talk about flooding events and typhoons and other natural disasters. Fire is no different. Fire is a killer, and many people have died, and we've got lots of evidence to support that throughout time. So if I just stop sharing my screen for just 1 second, and if I can just locate the animation for you. The animation itself is entitled Radiant Heat. And I'll just pause that there. Now, if you're ready for this share, I would like to share that with you now, and I'll join you on the other side. Thank you.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square metre, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 meters away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved natural fibre clothing, like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defence against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. Leaving early is always your safest option.
You know, when you see something as graphic and as real and as informative as that, to me, it is shocking and it's hard to accept that fire can be so damaging. But also, when we talk about risk and being in harm's way, why subject yourself to such difficult conditions, such an unbearable environment? Red heat is by far the biggest killer in a fire. There's no two ways about it. It's invisible. It travels laterally in straight lines away from the fire front or the source of the fire. And it can cause amazing amount of damage to human skin. And that video clearly typified that. One thing that the CFA do, particularly after sort of bad fire events, is we often conduct very subtle conversations with individuals that are impacted by the fire, and often try and gauge sort of some kind of evaluation of where they're at, what their thoughts are, what their feelings are. And these statements that are given on this slide speak volumes. You know, these were from people that in some cases were quite capable firefighting people with a level of understanding of fire, and yet they made these comments. And while these comments are fresh in your mind, I'd also like to share something else with you. And if you just give me 1 second, I'll stop this share. And what I'd like to do is do a new share with you, which is around, it's entitled, "I'll Never Do That Again." And what it does, it picks up very clearly on the feelings, on the emotion, on the very integrity of people and what they went through at the time of the fire. And again, I think this in itself speaks volumes.
Ten years ago, when all the dams were full and the tanks were full and there was plenty of water, I probably would have stayed and I would have died.
Nothing went the way we might have anticipated.
Whatever preparations you put into place, you only need something small to go wrong.
You know, in future, I don't think we'd want to put the kids through that sort of trauma, I guess. Yeah, wouldn't put the kids through that again.
If it was my choice, I wouldn't stay again. If we had another day like that, if I had the opportunity to get out, I would go before the fire even got here.
Go before the fire even got here. That's the closing statement from someone that survived a fire, a horrific fire, who would never go there again. He would never do that again. And this is what the CFA would strongly advocate. Go before the fire gets there. Leave well in advance. You can always come back. If there's a change of wind direction, the fire goes somewhere else, you can come back. Homes are insured. Our lives are not. What does this all mean for us? What does this mean for the communities within Stonyford? From the information that you've received so far on this Fire Safety Essentials presentation is that fire and caught in a fire is an extremely stressful and a traumatic situation. As human beings, we can't we can't cope with that level of stress and undue burden. We need to have a plan, and we need to be prepared to stick to that plan and have alternatives to the plan as the alternative situation arises. The plan B, the plan C, the plan D. We've got to be mindful of all the things that can happen during a bad fire day and us being trapped in a situation where exit roads may be blocked. Entry roads to a particular location may be blocked. Ember attack can come from all directions and spread very quickly. And of course, the invisible radiant heat, the intensity of heat that can actually just cause heat stroke, as we've already heard from the animation, and that level of disorientation and ultimate fatality. In the event of a bad fire day, your ability to make good decisions will be actually impacted by many factors. I'm just going to launch another poll at this stage now to gauge your understanding of perhaps what would you expect from a fire? So what do you think would impact your ability to make good decisions during the bad fire day? And this I'm going to launch this poll. It's a multiple choice questions. So tick as many as you like, or as few as you like, whatever you think that applies to you. Remember, I can't see you and I don't know who's answering what. It's totally anonymous. So take your time. Don't be shy. Feel free to offer your comments around the factors that the factors that you think would impact your ability. What is it that's going to affect you making good decisions in the fire? Oh, great. I've had lots of responses. So I'll give it a couple more seconds. Yep. And I'll end the polling there. And then I'll share the results. Yeah. Look, by far, and this comes up time and time again, by far the biggest factor is actually stress. You know, cognitively, once our level of understanding about a situation rises to a certain level, we can't handle anymore. The majority of us cannot handle stress. It's a difficult entity to control. Some of us can, and some of us have great coping mechanisms, but on the whole, when we're put in a situation where our adrenaline is heightened and we are trying to find an escape route or an exit way, a means of flight away from the situation, we are under a tremendous amount of stress and we lose our ability to think clearly. We know that that situation around us is changing very, very rapidly, and it's alien to us because we've not prepared. And there's that preparation word again. Things aren't going to plan. That's if there was a plan in place in the first place. Did you have a fire plan? You're running out of time. There just isn't enough time to do all the things that you should have done in preparation for this fire event. And of course, communication. You don't know what other family members are doing. Is your husband still on the tractor on the farm? Is your son still at that sports training that he was going to that day? Is your daughter at the pony training class? All of these factors, communication included, means that our ability to make good decisions is severely impacted. And how can we, I might just stop sharing those results now. What is it that we need to do to be better prepared? And this is where we go now with our next slide, which is really talking about how do we know if there is a fire? And I might just open the chat function here. Could anyone explain to me in their own words exactly what it is, where do they go, and how do they know if there's a fire in their area? So just quickly, just shoot a few things down into the chat bar there and let me know your thoughts about how do you know if there's a fire? Where are you going? What's the go here? Yep, some great responses coming back. Thank you for everyone that's responding. Oh, lovely. Yeah, there you go. 100%. The Vic Emergency app is the go-to place, and we'll talk about that very shortly. Before we get too much into the communication thread, let's start right at the beginning. How many of you actually know what this is? Yeah, absolutely. It's called the fire danger rating, the FDR. Most people would have seen this in some format or other. It appears on television. You can see it on social media. It's often located on the side of the road, generally but not always near a fire shed or a fire station. There is a bit of confusion around this, exactly what is the fire danger rating. So let's dispel that straight away. And what I'd like to do, I'm going to launch a poll. And this poll is basically talking about sort of understanding and how do you know if there's a fire in your area. It's a series of 3 questions. I'm going to launch that poll. And once again, as you've done in previous polls, hover your mouse over the response that you think is right, click it, and then move on to the next question. And as I say, there's 3 questions altogether. What does the fire danger rating mean? That's the first question. What is the FDR? The second question is, well, does anyone know how many code red days have happened in the Southwest region in the last 5 years? That's an interesting question. And the third question, I just scroll down here, is does anyone within our group today know how many severe or extreme days have happened in the Southwest in the last 5 years? So code red days and also severe or extreme days. Right, give you a few more seconds. I can see the responses coming through. Right, I'll end the polling there. Share the results. Fabulous. Okay, well, let me thank you for all your responses. And I'm just going to go through the correct responses here, okay? It's important for us to understand that what does the FDR mean? The FDR actually means that if the second response is the correct answer, it's an indicator of how bad the fire would be if one was to start. How hard would it be to put that fire out? And that's what we use the FDR for, an indicator of how bad a fire would be if it started on that particular day. Question 2, there are in actual fact have been no code red days in the Southwest in the last 5 years. And question 3, yes, we've had several. In fact, we probably had between 4, maybe 6, probably 6, I think, extreme and severe days in the Southwest region in the last 5 years. I'm going to stop sharing those results. Of course, if anyone wants to make comment about any of those findings, please feel free to make comments to the chat function. The biggest message that I'd like us to take away from the FDR is quite basically that it doesn't have to be a severe or an extreme day for it to be a bad fire day. If the conditions are right, and if by conditions I mean the wind, the location, the topography, the moisture content, and a number of other factors, there's a quite a complex algorithm or formula that's used to work out fire risk in a particular area. Remember how we spoke about fire districts before an indication is given on this scale, whether it's low, high, very high, severe, extreme, or code red. What we need to be aware of is what's the trigger that we use to be away from our properties on a potentially bad fire day. That bad day could be at a very high stage. It could even be at a high stage. Certainly we don't need to be around if it's severe or extreme. Let's just go into that in a bit more detail. When we talk of severe, for example, what do we mean? Severe means to expect hot, dry, and possibly windy conditions if a fire starts on a severe day, and if it takes hold, it may be uncontrollable. So severe may be uncontrollable. Conversely, extreme, as we move further to the right of the FDR, extreme. Expect extremely hot, dry, and windy conditions. And if a fire starts and takes hold on an extreme day, it will be uncontrollable. Our Australian homes are not designed to withstand weather conditions under such circumstances. Spot fires, remember how we mentioned ember attacks earlier on? Spot fires that are caused by ember attacks, by embers that travel ahead of the fire front, maybe up to 30 kilometres, as exemplified by the Black Saturday fires. Spot fires will start and move very quickly. In areas like Stonyford, where there's a lot of grassland, open grassland, these spot fires will come from many different directions. Moving on to code red, these are by far the worst conditions that we can have during the fire event. They are the worst conditions for a bushfire or even a grass fire. As I said, once again, our homes here in Australia are not designed to withstand the forces or conditions that are given out during a code red day. The safest place to be is to be away from that bushfire area, completely away. So moving on to the next thread here, which is communication. We live in a world of massive communication channels that are open to us to receive information and also to give out information. We talk about information sources, the traditional ones like reading the local newspaper, watching it on the television, for example, or receiving something in the mail, perhaps. We also talk about some of our digital platforms. And I often refer all of this information hub as infobesity. We are bombarded with an excessive amount of information on both traditional and digital platforms, such as social media. You've got a few icons there that are instantly recognizable this day: Facebook, Twitter, Google, Instagram, and the list goes on. We refer to these as informal sources of information. It might be that casual conversation in someone in the cafe, or when you're walking your dog. It might be that conversation with a neighbor over the back fence while you're watering the garden or picking your vegetables. These are very informal. They're not evidence-based, and they may not even be real time. Here at the CFA, we like to propose the following possible information sites. All of these sites provide real-time, evidence-based information about fire behaviour in and around your locality. By far, the one that we or I have been pushing has been the Vic Emergency app. By far, the best app that you can have in terms of fire emergency awareness. The app allows you to actually look at what fire behaviour is happening in your area and then increase the radius of search so that you know if you're travelling from Stonyford into Warrnambool or Camperdown into Colac, for example, you can track the best way to go depending on where the fire activity is. I would strongly advocate for those of you that are listening and watching this afternoon to strongly consider having the Vic Emergency app. If there's nothing else that you take away from this presentation, have the app. It could be your lifesaver in the event of a bad fire day. Another lifesaver that I would really like to reiterate is the local news, ABC News. And I think the point that I'd like to make here is that on the event of a bad fire day, caught in a bad fire, for example, it can actually be quite a disorientating place, a very dark space, a very noisy space. Visibility can be very, very poor because of thick smoke. And the only way to keep connected with the outside world would be a battery-operated radio. Because communications will have gone down in the event of a fire, the only way that you can keep connected with your local ABC News channel, which will give you information about what's happening in the outside world, away from your dark, noisy, horrible world, is the radio. So have that battery-operated radio as a key component of your emergency bag, and more about your emergency bag very shortly. I'm going to just very briefly spend a bit of time going through the triage of messaging that becomes available as we try and navigate fire behaviour during a particular fire event. This triage event is strongly colour-coded and begins with an advice warning. And advice is simply just that. Advice that an incident is occurring in your locality, be aware. just assess conditions and monitor. Nothing to panic about. There is something going on. This advice warning can also be used as a notification that activity has subsided and there is no longer a danger to you. So remember that too. Next in this triage, we have watch and act. Again, watch and act. And the act part is by far the most crucial part of this warning. An emergency is developing nearby. You need to take action to protect yourself and others. An emergency warning, clearly the third component in this triage. Emergency read by its very nature. It's indicative that you are in imminent danger and that you need to take action immediately, or else you will be impacted. The messaging cannot be any clearer. This system has been around for some time and follows a strict pattern of advice, watch and act, emergency warning. And as the slide clearly shows at the bottom, we would rather that you did not wait for a warning. We would rather that you were to leave and leave early before even the warnings came out, because we'll explain to you why that's actually crucially important. I just want to spend, give some consideration to these two messages as well. Evacuation, by its very nature, self-explanatory. And evacuation, this message will come up on your Vic Emergency app or on your computer through the CFA that, okay, evacuation is recommended or procedures are in place for you to evacuate. Community information message usually comes out after the fire event, and it's usually in the form of a newsletter, and it's used, usually contains information to update communities affected by the recent emergency. It can also be used as notification that an incident has occurred and there is no threat to community. Let's put this all into context now as we move forward, okay? So bear with me for 2 seconds as we try and visualize this scenario. Here you are in Stonyford. The house is represented by a house in Stonyford. Some 18 minutes away, a fire starts. A fire starts 18 minutes away. The fire progresses. And as the fire progresses, it's first reported to 000 some 6 minutes after it has started along this timeline. So 6 minutes have passed before the fire is actually notified to the authorities. This is when the local CFA crew in Stonyford will get to their tanker and start following the messaging behind this fire warning. At 10 minutes, the fire is maybe 8 minutes from your home along this timeline. At this stage, you're unaware of this fire. You're at home. You may have drawn your blinds. It may be a hot day. You've got the air conditioning on and you're watching your favorite movie, perhaps. An advice message. Do you remember the advice, watch and act, and emergency, the triage? The first component of the triage, the advice message, is released maybe some 30 minutes after the fire actually started, giving you less than 5 minutes to take action. 20 minutes later, the fire has passed your home. You've been impacted, and an updated emergency warning is released at 20 minutes. So can you see the jump between advice to emergency with no watch and act? This is pivotal, isn't it? It makes absolute sense that we must never rely on the warning system. Obviously, communities that are further down the track will have had this warning far earlier and would have had more time to be away from the advancing fire. This leads into this perfect segue here we are, or there we were in our homes. If we had been a bit more vigilant, if we could use our senses, constantly using our senses to assess and monitor conditions around us. And I often find with many of the talks that I do, usually the face-to-face talks around fire safety essentials in our rural communities, there's a great intuitive sense within our communities, particularly folks that have always worked on land, etc. They know when the skies are slightly different color. They know when the rains are coming. They know when things aren't quite right. And you know that old adage that, hey, if things don't feel right, there's a strong likelihood that they're not right. We can look out, use our sense of vision and look out for the embers or soot or elements that don't look quite right. We can look for smoke on the horizon or smoke plumes. We can listen for the sound of fire. You know, if we're in a wooded area and we hear lots of crackling or falling trees, I mean, that ain't right. And of course, we can use our sense of smell and be able to smell fire. These are the early indicators, but we don't want to be in this situation where we can, often when you can see the smoke or see the flames, it's generally too late. So once again, preparation. Grab that emergency bag, put your fire plan into place and leave as soon as you possibly can. What I'm going to do now is just remind you of everything that we've learned so far, which is, look, the fire danger rating, the FDR, and its importance, using those credible, or should we say formal sources of information for local information to make informed decisions. And don't wait for the warning. Don't wait for the advice. Don't wait for the watch and act. And certainly don't wait for the emergency warning. We need to be gone, and we need to be gone early. We're now entering the final phase or final part of this presentation. And for me, by far, this is the one that sort of cements all those different components together, bringing together those elements of radiant heat, the FDR, and of course, your own perception of what embers mean and the intensity of fire. What I'm going to do now is go through a scenario with you. And what this scenario does is actually, it gives you, as close as we can, a hypothetical situation that allows you to think about what you would do in a situation that we are now going to work through. So here goes. It's 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. When you look outside, you can see that it's already hot and it's windy. The morning news is reporting that today is going to be a day of extreme fire danger rating. So refer back to what the FDR was, know where the extreme is sitting, know what extreme actually means. Hot, windy, if a fire kicks off, uncontrollable. Remember that. However, you've got heaps to do that day. You know, you've got an appointment with the dentist, then you've got to check in with the school headmaster because your son's not doing particularly well at school. You've got to jump in your car and you've got to go into Warrnambool to make sure that everything's okay and get those tasks done. But it's quite interesting. As you jump into your car on this extreme day, you can actually see little branches falling from the trees around you. And more importantly, you can feel the radiant heat coming through the glass on your car doors. You get to Warrnambool and you get your jobs done, but while you're there, it's coming up to lunchtime now, and you overhear people talking about a fire that started very near to Stonyford. You jump on the Vic Emergency app, 100%, because you know that's the go-to place for fire activity. Jump onto the Vic Emergency app and you find out whereabouts in Stonyford. Is it near to my home or what's going on? And you see that a fire has started near to your home, but it's not actually that close to your home at this stage. So what do? Well, you jump in your car and you start heading home to make sure that everything is okay. But as you get closer to your home, you see that the road is blocked by police. And what you do is you wind down your window and you have a chat with the policeman, and he advises you that, look, it's not safe for you to go down your road or into your area because the fire is still burning and trees have come down on the road. And you'll have to find somewhere else to go until the road is opened. And that may be 1 or 2 days. So that's the scenario that we put together, the first half of the scenario. What I'm going to do now is launch another poll. And this poll is going to be asking you quite clearly, in terms of planning and decision making, where would you be on an average Wednesday in summer? I mean, would you be at work, at home, or on vacation? And if you cast your minds back to last summer, if you'd have been asked to spend some time away from your home for a few nights in an emergency like this, would you have been prepared to do that? Would you be able to do it? And thirdly, again, casting your mind back to last summer, did you have an emergency kit packed with some clothes and important documents and medicines, etc.? Was that already in place? Okay, let me launch that poll now. I'll give you a couple of minutes while you just work your way through that. That's wonderful. Oh yeah, great responses. I'll just give another 5-10 seconds. Lovely. I'll end the polling now. Share results. Yeah, look, there's as you can see, and I'm sharing the results with you now, there's a 50-50 split of those people that will be at home and at work. Oh yeah, that's interesting. The majority of you would not have been prepared to spend a few nights away from home in such an emergency. There's probably about a 60-40 split there. And again, last summer, no one had an emergency kit ready. No one had packed a bag. Very interesting. I'll stop sharing those results. And this is good intel for us at the CFA. And a lot of this information does go on to our data analysis team. So we draw some really juicy reflections from that. What I'm going to do now, okay, so we've got that scenario in your mind, and we're going to just add another dimension to that while we're still thinking on our feet in a situation like this and pooling all those new bits of information that we've got around fire behaviour. Same day. The fire is still a while away from your property. Except this time, when you jump on the Vic Emergency app, you see that the fire is still a while away. The small yellow triangle that you get, the shade here on your phone, doesn't quite reach your home, okay? So the triangle, the yellow triangle on the app, is still a bit away from you. It's nowhere near your home at the moment. You're thinking to yourself, okay, I've got enough time to run home and grab some important stuff. So you jump in your car and off you drive. As you get out of your car on the driveway, you can smell smoke. So you're using that sense of smell. It's already really windy and hot. Remember, extreme day, critical components for extreme day weather is heat and also wind. You check the app on your phone, okay, again and again, and you see that the small yellow triangle on your screen is still an advice message. Remember that first element of the triage, advice? You should have enough time, you think to yourself. So you go away, you're frantic at this stage, you know, you've sensed smell of smoke in the air, you know, you can see the intensity of heat around you. You're frantically running around the house, grabbing those important things, right, checking them off, running back to the car. Every time you run back to the car, you're checking the app to make sure that that little yellow triangle hasn't moved near you. Every now and then, you know, you're looking for that evacuation sign, but nothing's coming yet. And all of a sudden, you think to yourself, still got loads of time, I'll be fine, okay? You're running through a list in your head, and this is how frantic this is all becoming. Oh, what do I need? Where do I find it? Is it packed? Oh, where did I put it? It's not where I left it. All these things go through your mind, all of these things, you know? You're looking for your photographs, your birth certificate, your insurance documentation, and medications for you, or your asthma inhaler, those new pills that the doctors just put you on for sort of your migraine attacks, and of course medication for pets, a pet basket, a dog cage. Oh, what's going to happen to Auntie Flo, who lives 3 doors down the road, who's on her own and a vulnerable member of the community? And this is where everything comes to a head. All these things are just floating through your head, and you're trying to create some form of collective thought around it, but it's not working, because each time you go outside, when you go out this time to the car to drop those important things in, you notice the embers have started falling near your home. And in fact, you notice that patches of smoke as well rising from that bunch of leaves that you were meaning to rake up from the previous weekend. Embers have started falling. You feel that surge of adrenaline that happens at times like this, that fight-flight syndrome. And you feel that rushing through your body. You're out of time. The question that I would like to pose to you now is, what is the one thing that you could have done differently? How could you have in some way mitigated this situation? And again, respond in the chat function if you like. And while these responses are coming through, let me just add a bit more clarity to this scenario to give you the real depth of what a desperate situation this is to be in. There is no consideration of kids at this stage. Well, where are the kids? The road that you're going to leave on, which way do you go? Is it going to be blocked? Is it going to be accessible by other means? Do you have horses? Who's going to look after the horses? Did someone let them out of the paddock? Because we know horses will find areas of safety, generally speaking, once they're freed. Who's going to look after that vulnerable member within the community who does need help? Does anyone know where she is? Do you know, in a situation like this, there is so much to consider. And you know, this is just a hypothetical situation. This isn't for real. And can you see that in some ways I've deliberately bombarded you with lots of different what if this, what if that. And these are all the considerations that need to be made. Preparation. Preparation by way of a fire plan, by way of sitting down with your fire plan, with your family members, with your community even, to discuss what you will do. Stonyford is a great little community. Yes, it's a small community, but it has great cohesion with the community. Everyone knows everyone. And that's a great strength to have in the event of a critical event of any kind. So learn and understand who are the vulnerable members of the community, who will need help, and what are the fire plans that are in place. Your CFA captain is more than happy to take questions from you, and I'll be giving you his details towards the end of the presentation. And these are the very things that are going to save you. They are going to mitigate risk and keep you out of harm's way. It is about having that plan, and I can't reiterate that enough. Have that Vic Emergency app on your phones, if nothing else. We are able to arrange bushfire planning workshops, and again, the resources are available for that towards the end of the presentation. A few words about COVID-19. Unfortunately, this particular situation is still around and may well be around for some time yet. The CFA advocate that you may leave a high fire risk area on a day of high fire danger. If you are in a self-isolation mode, it's important that you continue that at your next location and make sure that those around you are aware of your self-isolation and that you take all necessary precautions with COVID planning. You may well travel for the purposes of preparing your property for the fire season, and that's allowable during COVID-19. We have to consider the next few slides very importantly, because even the best laid plans can fail. And if such, what are your survival options? Having viewed the earlier presentations around radiant heat particularly, there is a strong need for you to always cover up. The more that you can limit your exposure to the radiant heat, the better. And using sort of the clothing of natural fiber, and covering your face, your nose, your mouth, your head, your feet and ankles, everything. It's not rocket science, folks. It's about staying alive. And I would suggest that this clothing or these items of clothing are key components of your emergency bag. If you have to rush and go in a hurry and not had time to change, all you have to do is grab that bag that already contains everything that you're going to need, just in case you get exposed to radiant heat on your exit from a fire danger area. Absolutely critical, and there's no two ways about that. I'd also like to say a few words of just reinforcing the messages that we had at the beginning around radiant heat. Radiant heat is a killer. It's intense, and we're not designed to withstand it. The only way we can seek shelter is by hiding inside or behind solid objects. Remember that radiant heat will travel through glass, so try not to be near glass in the event of it breaking or exploding. Try also, if possible, if you do get caught in a bad fire situation, you can seek refuge in water courses, such as rivers, dams, and swimming pools. The CFA do not advise seeking refuge in a stationary car or vehicle. Cars are designed to take you from A to B as a mode of transport, but we do understand that in a crisis situation, you may have to seek refuge in a stationary car. In which case, if it is possible, make sure the car is away from a road, away from an access path or trail, and preferably on a burnt ground or darkened ground. Make sure that in such an event, you leave the lights on. You enter a space within the car below the level of the windows, whether you pull the front seats back or push them forward to get more room in the back, depending on the size that you've got to navigate with. Make sure that you lower yourself below the level of the window line and you cover yourself with a blanket, and you have a bottle of water underneath with you. Do not wet the blanket. This will become hot and may cause a steam burn and make the situation very uncomfortable. Make sure that you monitor the fire around you as best as you can. And once the fire front passes, and it will, remove yourself from the vehicle and try and locate yourself further away from the fire front, and again in a burnt area. The best place is not to be in such a situation. Why put yourself in such a compromising position? Stay safe, be away from the fire, monitor the conditions, and leave early. Another consideration is what we call the bushfire neighbourhood safer places. These are designed as a place, and they are very much a last resort. They are designed to be a safe place away from the radiant heat with minimum fuel load within a certain perimeter. The actual place of last resort within the Stonyford area is actually, there are two within 20 kilometres of Stonyford. One is in Cobden. Precisely in Cobden is actually on the Curdy Street median strip, and it's approximately 18 kilometres away. The second bushfire place of last resort is in Camperdown. Now this is about 16 kilometres away, and it's actually located on the service road on the north side of Manifold Street, including the centre reserve. So there are two, but we would rather you did not go to a place of last resort unless it was a last resort. Don't expect 5-star accommodation. Don't expect someone bringing you cups of coffee. These places won't guarantee safety or be a comfortable experience, but they might give you an element of safety away from the radiant heat. I show some of these graphics at this stage just to reinforce that, look, Mother Nature can be a force to reckon with, and fire is no stranger to that. Fire is invasive, uncontrollable, and unpredictable. We need to use our senses. We need to understand fire behavior, and I'm hoping this presentation is giving you an idea of that, or a sense of fire behavior. And we need to be out of harm's way early, adopting and utilizing our fire plan, sticking to it, and moving out of harm's way. This slide just reinforces the need to make that plan. Have your survival preparation in place. Download that Vic Emergency app. And the very last point I'd like to make is certainly contact James Reynolds, who's your local CFA captain. James and I have had a couple of chats, and the sense that I get is that he's very passionate about community safety, and certainly very passionate about the community in and around Stonyford and keeping them safe in the event of a fire. His contact details are given here. Please feel free to contact him, and certainly you can actually discuss the capacities or capabilities even, and capacity of the local brigade during fire time. Here at the CFA, and I personally certainly acknowledge that some of this content can be quite disturbing, and if you feel that there's any element of being emotionally impacted by it, you are free to contact the two contact services that we've got highlighted on the screen at the moment. Before I end this presentation, I would just like to launch our final poll. And this final poll is quite a crucial poll when it comes to our sort of qualitative information that we're trying to assess here. And this poll is really, as I say, our final poll that asks two questions. Did this meeting give you a better understanding of bushfire risk in the area of Stonyford? A simple yes, no, or whether you confirm what you already know. And I know that some of our listeners are actually brigade members. I've just dropped my mouse, 1 second. There we go. Fantastic. Are actually brigade members. And the second question is, would you recommend this program to family, friends, or neighbours that live in fire-prone areas? So they're really for us to assess the worth of this program. So if you could kindly offer your responses there, I'll launch the polling. Fantastic, thank you for that. I'm now going to, I think you've all answered, yep, I'm going to end the polling. Beautiful, thank you very much for your responses. I'll just close out of that. Okay. I'd like to thank particularly James for his support in helping me put this presentation together and some of the content that was required. I'd also like to thank everyone that's attended the presentation this afternoon. I trust that it's given you, and I think from the data that's just come back, yes, the majority are very happy with the content and has been invaluable. My closing message is to reinforce the key messages of today's presentation is to stay safe, take ownership, know what you're capable of, have your fire plan, make sure everyone is aware, make sure that you look after your community, and make sure that you stay safe as you possibly can during this fire period. My name is Raj Samurai, and I'd like to thank you once again for your time, for sharing with me this afternoon. Bye for now.